Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. If you're still here after all that, you already know the kind of stories we tell. The kind that crawl under your skin, that echo in the quiet when the episode ends. If you want to carry a piece of that darkness with you, wear what haunts you. Our exclusive line of merch is made for listeners who feel more at home in the uncanny, the unspoken, the things that don't make sense in the daylight. Shirts, hoodies, and other gear, designed with that same atmosphere of dread, mystery, and whispered wrongness. Candles support the channel, feed the stories. You can grab yours at https://theshadowsprintify me, and as always, don't look behind you. Hezbollah 7 Chapter 1. The Quiet Entry, Southern Lebanon, August. Just past midnight, 32.3960 degrees N, 35.1634 degrees E. The silence of the border was wrong. It wasn't the ordinary stillness Tova Rami knew from long hours shadowing infantry in the north. No cicadas, no rustling brush. Even the dogs that usually barked themselves hoarse at passing vehicles were mute tonight, as if something had passed through earlier and drained the land of its reactions. She adjusted her Kevlar vest, still damp with sweat, and followed the column of 6 Israeli soldiers moving down a dry wadi under full blackout. Each man wore night vision goggles and digital camouflage cloaks coated in dust and leaf fragments. Their rifles remained at low ready, never swinging too far, never pointing without cause. At the front was the unit commander, Captain Alon Vess. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about the way he moved that reminded her of pre-recorded footage. The gait was too consistent, too fluid. He'd barely spoken during the 12-hour exfil across disputed terrain. No idle chatter, not even the usual barked Hebrew shorthand. He gave orders with a flick of the hand or a slight turn of the head, and the rest of Hezbollah 7 responded like puppets with strings woven from wire. She knew these weren't conscripts. These were professionals. Quiet men, old war dogs, men with faces like cracked leather and eyes that didn't twitch. One wore a necklace of plastic rosary beads, worn smooth from years of contact. Another had tally marks carved into his M4's handguard, but something about them felt repurposed. They'd hiked through the night, from the Israeli side of the blue line, past an old UN observation post, down into territory where the maps stopped matching what was on the ground. The terrain had been altered, craters filled, buildings erased like they'd never been there. And not once had she seen any of them look at a GPS. Vess had led them without hesitation, as if following remembered footsteps from a dream. His lips moved silently every few minutes, like he was whispering a prayer or rehearsing coordinates only he could hear. "Why are we here?" she asked when they finally paused in an abandoned olive grove. The men crouched low. They blended into the trees like they belonged there. One of them, Rajev, a grizzled EOD specialist, pulled out a field sat phone, tapped the screen, then looked to Vess for confirmation. Vess didn't answer right away. He stood very still, head tilted. Then, to disrupt, he said. Tova squinted. Disrupt what? He turned his head toward her, face obscured by his goggles and shemagh. The corridor, before the next consignment is passed. And who authorized this? A longer pause. Then, does that matter? Something about the way he said it chilled her. It wasn't flippant. It wasn't sarcastic. It was sincere, like the question itself had become irrelevant a long time ago. Later that night, while the others set up perimeter overwatch near an old bombed-out school, Tova reviewed the metadata logs from her camera and encrypted audio notes. Every file she'd made that included Vess's voice, corrupted. Not erased, just wrong. Audio glitched and looped. The footage had moments where Vess wasn't casting a shadow, or when his reflection didn't appear in shattered windows. In one file, she noticed something horrifying. The date stamp on her audio track read 2019.05.21, over 2 years ago. But she'd recorded it just hours ago. She dug deeper. Accessed old clearance logs she still had from her time embedded during the 2021 conflict. A classified KIA report came up. Vess, Alon, Captain, Reconnaissance Division, deceased, died in a drone strike northeast of Gajar. Remains confirmed, burial confirmed, and the photo, his face, exactly as she'd seen it under the goggles. Same scar, same name. She looked back toward the grove, where Captain Vess now stood beside a twisted cedar, staring toward the ridgeline like he could see through the darkness. Tova's hands trembled as she tapped a quick note into her recorder. "We're not supposed to be here. We're not following orders. We're inside something else's chain of command." Chapter 2, the corridor they moved at dawn. Silent, fluid, like shadows running along the belly of a war that hadn't officially begun. Tova Rami followed, keeping her steps light. Her legs ached from the uneven terrain, and her gear clung like damp parchment to her spine. The light was a sick orange-grey, filtering through smoke from the southern hills. Somewhere out there, something had already been bombed, and no one had reported it. The route Vess took followed no obvious road, no paved footpath, just dips in the earth that looked too symmetrical to be natural furrows carved by armored vehicles long buried, trenches worn by boots now rotted into soil. They reached a ravine, steep and lined with shale. A stone footbridge crossed it, narrow, ancient. Tova hadn't seen it on any topographic map. "This is it," Vess said. His voice startled her. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken since they'd left the olive grove. She stepped closer. Beyond the bridge, carved into the hillside, was a corrugated steel door, partially hidden behind debris and brush. "Is that a Hezbollah supply tunnel?" she asked. "No," he said calmly. "Worse." Inside, the air changed. Not just in temperature, though it dropped fast, but in tone. The corridor didn't echo. The sound of boots on concrete was swallowed, absorbed. A string of exposed bulbs dangled from a low ceiling, stretching deeper than the eye could follow. Some flickered, some buzzed faintly. The hallway had the stink of wet stone, gun oil, and something faintly metallic, like pennies soaked in milk. The men didn't hesitate. Each moved with a purpose, even when the path forked. Vess never checked a map, never paused. He simply walked, turned, and the others followed like they already knew the route, as if the place had been built for them. Tova lingered behind Rejev as they entered a square chamber with old ammunition crates stacked against the far wall. The crates were Soviet-era, stenciled in Cyrillic, wood rotting and warped. Some had been broken open, and the rusted guts of disassembled RPGs spilled across the floor like bones. "What is this place?" she whispered. "Transit point," Rejev muttered, not looking at her. "For what?" He finally turned. "You already know. That's why they let you come." She opened her mouth to argue, and then caught movement in the corner of the chamber. A shape, slouched. Watching, a man, unarmed, wearing an old Hezbollah uniform, though the insignia was wrong, black ink over green camo. He stood motionless. "Contact left," Tova hissed, stumbling back, hand moving instinctively to her holster. But none of the team reacted. They walked past him, and the man didn't move, didn't even breathe. When she turned back, he was gone. Only the imprint of his boots remained, still smoking. By midday, they reached what Vess called the drop chamber. A circular room, with 5 concrete shafts descending into the earth, deep enough that no echo returned when Rejev dropped a rock. "There used to be other teams," Vess said, looking at the shafts. His tone was flat, reverent. "Used to be?" Tova asked. He nodded. "Until they went too deep." She opened her mouth to press further, but he turned to her slowly, eyes glinting beneath his goggles. "Do you know what this place is?" She hesitated. "A weapons corridor, an old smuggling route." Vess smiled thinly. "No, this is where things are passed between hands, not just weapons, not just information. We're standing in the throat of a war that never dies. It just changes which mouth it speaks from." That night, Tova opened her satellite tablet again. She couldn't help it. The photo of Vess's KIA file still sat in her cache. She stared at it, compared every detail, the man in the picture and the one she'd just spoken to. Same scar above the left eyebrow, same pale knot in the lip, same hollow stare. She magnified the background. Behind him, his own headstone, Hebrew etched into limestone. The date, 2021. She looked back across the dark tunnel. Captain Vess stood alone, facing a wall, whispering to it, and the wall, impossibly, was whispering back. Chapter 3, Echoes in the feed. The next day began without sunrise. The light that trickled into the corridor's entrance was sickly, scattered, like it had already passed through something thick and living before it reached them. The air buzzed faintly, not with machinery, but like static from somewhere ancient trying to remember the sound of electricity. Tova hadn't slept. She hadn't even closed her eyes. Her dreams came now while she was awake, images flickering over her vision like corrupted drone feed overlays. They moved deeper underground. No one commented on how far they were from the surface now. They had passed something that might have once been a checkpoint, a place with long-dead monitors, shattered antennae, and a shattered plastic chair crushed against a rebar wall. Someone had written a phrase in Arabic across the console in flaking ash. "We hear them breathing inside the wire." She tried to ask Regev about it. He just grunted and adjusted his rifle. But the deeper they moved, the more the feed from her bodycam began to glitch. First it was compression errors, flickering frames, ghost outlines. Then came the faces, blips of impossible expressions between frames. Men's faces staring back at her from reflections that shouldn't be reflective. The skin not pale, but grey-green, bloated, eyes completely black, mouth slack. Each time she paused playback, the face would disappear again. She showed it to Vess that afternoon, confronting him during a brief rest beside a buried APC shell half consumed by rust. He watched the video quietly. Then with perfect calm he said, "That's good. It means the feed is syncing." "Syncing with what?" she snapped, chest tightening. "Latency is normal. We're close." "To what, Captain?" she pressed. "You keep talking like we're completing an objective, but I haven't seen you contact base once. I haven't heard you radio anyone. You don't even check maps. What is this op? Who are you taking orders from?" Vess turned to her slowly, and for the first time since she joined them, she saw it. His eyes weren't reflecting light. They were absorbing it, dark, clouded, veined with something that looked like cracks in black stone. "I'm taking orders from the corridor," he said. The rest of the team showed no reaction. Even when they encountered the second contact, a figure standing half naked against the tunnel wall, facing it, hands raised in surrender. The man was wearing a burned-out IDF uniform, decades old. His rank patch was unreadable. His jaw hung loose like it had been broken and never healed. "Identify yourself," Tova called out, but no one else reacted. They filed past him like he wasn't there. The man's eyes slowly turned to her. He mouthed something. It wasn't Hebrew. It wasn't Arabic. It sounded like a language made of keystrokes. Click, 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 a pause, click, click, click. And then he vanished, like a packet of corrupted data purged from a system. Tova had been recording everything. She found a quiet spot behind a rusted generator coil and reviewed her footage, syncing it to her satlink for later exfil. But every clip she reviewed told a different story. In one version, she was walking alone. In another, Vess had no voice at all, just movements, twitching, repeated, a marionette stuck in a loop. And in one, her own face blurred out, her voice replaced by another, female, calm and unfamiliar, whispering, "You are not documenting this. You are delivering it." She nearly tore the satlink apart. Instead, she turned to Vess that night as the team set camp beneath a concrete arch covered in soot and old Arabic graffiti. She found him alone, unmoving, arms folded behind his back as if standing at a funeral. "What happened to you in Gajar?" she asked. He said nothing. "What brought you back?" He turned his head slowly, mechanically. "Who said I ever left?" Tova shivered. "You died," she said. "I read the report. I saw the photos. That strike incinerated the entire forward post. There were no survivors." "That was the objective," he replied. "What does that mean?" "It burned the path open. Fire is a kind of clearance." She turned away, reeling. In the distance, she saw Regev staring up at something high above, barely visible in the smoke-thickened sky. She followed his gaze and realized what he was looking at, a drone, but not one of theirs. It was hovering in place, its red LED blinking unnaturally fast. It wasn't scanning. It wasn't surveilling. It was watching, waiting. And below it, carved into the rock wall, someone had scraped a crude image, a human skull. And underneath it, the Hebrew characters for returned, not redeployed. Chapter 4, Rules of Engagement. Tova woke to whispers. Not speech, not in any language she recognized, but tones that felt inside her skull rather than in the air, like someone thinking too loudly behind her eyes. She sat up fast, reached for her camera instinctively, but the lens was fogged from the inside, and the screen showed only a faint static overlay that shimmered like heat off a corpse. She wiped at it. The feed cleared. Vess was already standing, always the first one up. The others rose in near unison. None looked at each other. None spoke. They simply shifted formation like a school of fish, sensing a predator just outside their depth. She followed, stumbling into her boots and slinging her gear bag over her shoulder, heart hammering. Something had changed. The air felt thinner, less like they were underground, and more like they were in a lung that hadn't drawn breath in years. They didn't walk far. The tunnel opened into a dome-like cavity, its walls reinforced with rusted metal ribs and shattered tile. The roof was missing, or maybe it had never been there. Sunlight spilled in, grey and blurred. They were above ground again, or close, somewhere between surface and soil. Vess raised a closed fist. Everyone stopped. Across the clearing stood a small group of armed men. Hezbollah, real ones, young, jittery, probably locals tasked with watching over the corridor. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the Hezbollah fighters raised his weapon, just slightly, not enough to threaten, but enough to announce, "You don't belong here." Vess stepped forward. No weapon, no translation. He said something, not Hebrew, not Arabic. It was flat, precise, like reading numbers from an old computer screen. The sound carried strangely, bouncing off the walls, ricocheting back in a way that made Tova's ears ring. The fighters froze. One dropped his rifle. Another began to weep, not sobbing, but leaking tears, like his body had remembered something terrible before his brain could register it. Then one by one they turned and walked into the light. Not ran, not fled, walked, like they were following a forgotten order, like they recognized their commanding officer. Tova stood speechless. "What the hell did you just say to them?" she asked. Vess didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered where the fighters had disappeared, over a ridge covered in pale grey ash. When he finally turned to her, his expression was unreadable. "I issued a recall." "To who?" "To everyone listening." She stared at him. "You speak Farsi now." He shook his head. "No." "Then what?" Vess held up one hand, a universal gesture for silence. Far off over the ridge came a sound she would never forget, not a scream, not gunfire. A chorus of boots stomping in unison. Hundreds, maybe more, echoing up from below the earth. Each beat perfectly timed, like soldiers in drill formation beneath the soil. They regrouped. No one spoke. Tova finally approached Rajev, who sat polishing a knife that was too long to be standard issue. His hands moved automatically, but his face was strained, bloodless, his lips cracked. "You heard it too," she said. He didn't look up. "I've heard it for days." Tova crouched. "What is this? What is Hezbollah 7? Rajev stopped. Then after a long pause, "There were only 6 of us." "Always 6. That's why the name makes no sense." She blinked. "So who's the 7th? He looked up slowly. I think you are." That night, while the others set perimeter watch, Tova reviewed her footage. Again, the files were fractured. One clip showed her interviewing Vess, except she was holding no mic. She wasn't even asking questions. She was nodding, silently, like she already knew the answers. Another showed her sitting with Rajev, except in the clip, he was asking her about the mission, about what came next. And then, finally, a clip appeared that had no timestamp. She clicked it. The camera showed her sleeping, mouth slightly open, eyes twitching in REM. In the frame's background stood a figure in full IDF combat uniform, facing away from the lens. On his vest was the name patch. Rami, her father's name. He had died in the 06 war. No body was recovered. She closed the camera, stared into the dark. Vess stood facing the far tunnel again, whispering, not words, commands. And somewhere deeper in the corridor, something was listening. Chapter 5. The things that answer by morning. The ash had spread. It clung to Tova's boots, worked its way into the creases of her vest, even dusted the lenses of her goggles when she wasn't looking. But it didn't fall. It grew in fine grey threads that curled from cracks in the tunnel floor like hair from a buried scalp. No one mentioned it. Not Regev, not Vess, not any of the others, whose expressions had become so blank she began to wonder if they still recognized her. They moved again, deeper. Vess called it the second descent. As they walked, Tova heard movement behind the walls, not rats, not whined, footsteps, deliberate, mirroring theirs, always a few seconds behind. She tried recording it. Every time she played it back, the audio cut out, or worse, changed, into voices she almost recognized. Voices saying things she never remembered saying. A distorted version of her brother's voice repeating, "You're just here to witness. You're not part of this. You are the seventh." Hours later, they passed through a sealed blast door. The metal was pitted, warped, and carried scorch marks from the inside. Something had once tried to get out, something that had melted its way halfway before giving up or being pulled back. Vess entered a code without hesitation. The keypad lit up green, and the door hissed open. They stepped into a narrow hall flanked by rusted monitors and racks of dead servers. Everything smelled faintly of ozone and embalming fluid. Regev muttered something, a prayer maybe, and clutched the rosary around his neck tight enough to draw blood. "What is this place?" Tova asked, sweeping her light across the walls. Scorched Hebrew letters lined the corridor, looping again and again. "They follow orders, even now." They reached a chamber, hexagonal, low-ceilinged, lit by a single humming fluorescent strip that buzzed like it was dying. And in the center, a steel crate, big enough for a body, sealed shut with 4 mechanical locks, one on each corner, Hebrew and Arabic warning symbols etched into its sides. "Don't touch that," Regev said, but Vess was already kneeling beside it, typing something into a tablet wired to the crate's locking system. "I said." Vess didn't look up. "She needs to see." "See what?" Tova asked, stepping closer despite herself. Vess looked up at her now. His voice was calm, clearer than ever. "The payload. The reason we were called back. The thing the corridor delivers." The locks disengaged. A hiss of cold vapor rolled from the seams. The crate opened. Inside was something she could barely process at first. It looked like a human corpse, but wrong, preserved too perfectly. No decay, no smell, no eyes. The sockets were hollow, burned black, and the skin had a subtle ripple beneath it, like something was still breathing underneath. Her stomach turned. Then she saw it, a military ID tag fused into the tissue just beneath the clavicle. She leaned closer. Rami, Gideon LT Israeli, DEFENSE, Forces KIA, July 22, 2006, she staggered back. Her father, there was no mistaking it. That jawline, that old scar from the metal lathe incident. He had never come home. They had buried an empty casket. "He's part of the payload," she whispered. Vess nodded. "He was the first. The first what?" "The first one who answered the corridor." Tova couldn't breathe. Regev sat down heavily, his face pale. They weren't just taking the bodies, they were integrating them. Vess stood now, his voice patient. "Orders never truly end. Not in war, they just move, change hosts. We follow, they follow. The ones who died for nothing, now they serve with purpose. The corridor preserves them, gives them form again, makes them useful." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the crate began to hiss louder. The body moved. Tova screamed, stumbling back as the lungs filled, the chest rising like a corpse gasping awake. The eyes opened. Black voids, no pupils. Inside them, she saw herself, and the voice that came out of her father's mouth was hers, distorted, echoed like playback from a bad mic. "You've been drafted." The lights died. A sharp electric snap, and the chamber fell into absolute darkness. And from every direction, footsteps answered. Dozens, hundreds, coming from deeper in the corridor, all marching in time. Chapter 6. The procession they didn't run. They couldn't. Tova stood paralyzed, eyes fixed on the thing in the crate, her father, or what had once been him. His chest now rose and fell slowly, unnaturally, as if some force inside were learning how to mimic breath again. The chamber had gone nearly black, except for the faint blue-green pulse that flickered beneath the creature's skin, like a heartbeat seen through milk, or a tracking signal pulsing from inside a coffin. Vess raised a hand in the dark. He wasn't reaching for help. He was saluting. The marching grew louder. Boots on steel, gravel, wet stone, impossible to track. They echoed in ways that didn't make sense, folding in on themselves, looping in layers like a sound played back on corrupted tape. Rajev whispered a psalm under his breath, voice shaking. Tova reached out, grabbing his shoulder, more for her own grounding than his. Vess spoke again. Only this time it wasn't Hebrew, or Arabic, or any language she knew. It was phonetic, guttural, full of clicks and reversed syllables, like someone playing a military code backward through a broken radio. Whatever it was, it worked. The body in the crate sat up. Tova gagged as she saw the spinal column stretch unnaturally to accommodate the movement. No rigor mortis, no stiffness, just fluid, graceful, puppet-like animation. The skin along the jaw cracked, and flakes of it fell off in soft clumps, revealing something darker and glistening underneath, not flesh. Not bone, fiber, wire, wet glass. Her father's face turned toward her. Slowly, it didn't blink. "Seventh accepted," it said in her voice. The footsteps arrived. From the corridor's far end, figures emerged, single file, wearing uniforms from across decades and factions, weathered IDF fatigues from the 80s, Hezbollah greens turned black with rot, American surplus with names half erased, even Soviet-era body armor etched with strange red markings. Each of them walked the same, shoulders square, eyes empty, boots in sync. Each of them was dead. Tova couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Vess stepped toward them, his face lit by the faint luminescence of the reanimated. He nodded once, then turned to Tova and said, "Witness the return. This is not resurrection. It is re-enlistment." Rajev broke first. He fired. 3 quick rounds from his sidearm sent a mass straight into the chest of the first figure. The shots landed. No blood, no reaction. The body jerked slightly, then simply absorbed the trauma. Another figure raised its hand, not to attack, but to salute. Tova screamed. The sound didn't echo. The chamber swallowed it whole. The others began to speak, in perfect unison. Voices layered, not mechanical recorded. "You have arrived. The corridor has selected. Death was a temporary command lapse. We await designation." Tova ran, out of the chamber, down the corridor, into the dark. The footsteps followed, not chasing, but matching her rhythm. Every time she turned a corner, the path looked changed. Not just longer, but older, like it had been waiting. She passed a side room where monitors blinked, faintly, flickering. One screen displayed her bodycam feed in real time, even though she'd turned it off. Another showed her mother's house back in Ashdod. The live feed was from inside, and the timestamp read, +0032H. Subject accepted. Observation ongoing. She collapsed in a utility alcove, chest heaving, bile rising in her throat. And then she heard her father's voice again, not echoing, not distorted, clear, soft, gentle. "It's okay, Motek. You've made it to the other side of orders. Now we can rest." Vess found her hours later. He crouched beside her, smiled faintly. His uniform was covered in ash. "Every war ends," he said, "but not every soldier retires." She looked up at him, eyes red. "Why me?" Vess touched her temple with 2 fingers, not cruelly, morely like baptism. "Because you stayed to watch, and watching is the first step in becoming part of it." Somewhere above, a drone passed overhead. It hovered, paused, and in its feed, piped to a command tent somewhere near Haifa, the operators saw a figure step from a ruined corridor, raise a hand and salute. She was wearing a uniform, and her nameplate read, Vale T. KIA, unconfirmed, Chapter 7, command loops July 23rd, 400 hours. The live drone feed was forwarded to a private server buried within a Mossad relay node outside Tel Aviv. Encrypted, flagged, archived but not acknowledged. The file labeled it. Hezbollah 7 returned feed TMP classification. Temporal anomaly suspected. Do not forward without clearance echo. No one responded. No one ever did. Tova awoke to the sound of typing. She was sitting upright in a white tent, not the chamber, not the corridor. A field tent, military issue, with old brass buttons and fresh fabric. Somewhere dry, windless. Her gear sat beside her on a crate, cleaned, pressed. Her rifle gleamed like it had never been fired. The boots, however, were still caked in ash. A Across from her, a young conscript typed at a laptop with no screen. His fingers moved rhythmically, never missing a beat, as if he were copying text from inside his own skull. Tova sat up. The boy paused as if sensing her. "You're back," he said. "Didn't think you'd report so early." She tried to speak, but what came out wasn't her voice. Not quite. The words were hers, but the tone wasn't. Calm, authoritative, devoid of doubt. "Status report," she heard herself say. The boy nodded. "Fourth cycle stabilized. Corpses integrated without resistance. No deviation from corridor protocol. Any incursions? 1. Russian special unit. Ghosted. Left no pattern." Tova blinked. What did ghosted mean? Her thoughts itched, like static crawling beneath her scalp. "ETA on next drop?" she asked. The boy frowned. "Drop of what?" Tova looked down. Her hands were typing into her lap, an invisible keyboard. She hadn't told them to move. Her fingers were relaying code in a cadence that wasn't hers. She recognized the rhythm. Drone command syntax. Line overrides. Force loop reanimation cycles. She wrenched her hands still. The boy froze. He looked up. His eyes went wide. "Ma'am," he whispered. You're not done cooking yet." Tova stood. The tent flap opened on its own, revealing a vast plain of white ash. No sun. Just a high, even light like a surgical theater stretched across a desert. Figures moved along the horizon. Uniforms from all nations, all eras. None of them breathing, and all of them walking in a perfect loop. Regev was among them. His eyes were hollow now, mouth twitching as if mid-prayer, never finishing. He carried an old IDF radio, one that sparked with no batteries inside. From it came a woman's voice looping, Tova's voice. Objective located, integration complete, awaiting further directives. It repeated, over and over. She screamed, not aloud, inward, and something heard it. The world around her folded inward, the field gone, the air thickening like oil. And in the center of the rupture, Vess stepped through. Not marching, not walking, growing. His limbs stretched slightly wrong, like watching time-lapse footage of bones forming inside a body already dead. Veins like wires, eyes like camera apertures, blinking into focus. "You were never here to escape it," he said. She backed away. "This is a simulation. I never left the chamber." "No, you never left command. You just changed form." He pointed upward. Far above, the sky was cracked like broken glass, and through it she could see drone footage, live feed from her own camera, watching herself, recording her reactions. She looked back at Vess. "What am I now?" He smiled. "Your clearance echo. The 7th is always the archive. You're not the mission, you're the memory of it." And then he began to decay in real time. Skin sloughing, metal beneath, and beneath that, a face she knew. Her brother, she collapsed. The ash swallowed her whole. As her body was buried layer by layer, she heard the command line restart inside her skull. Boot up tone, HUD reconnect, and a single phrase echoed through the soil. Designated. Preserved, deployed. Chapter 8, Return Protocol ash moved like water. Tova didn't breathe beneath it. She didn't choke. She simply existed in a thick, quiet layer of memory sediment that pulsed like a second heart. Her eyes opened in the dark, not her real eyes, something newer, grown beneath, adapted to the corridor's bandwidth. She could see frequencies now. Command chains rendered as light, orders braided into muscle, names etched into carbon. And one of those names, buried deeper than all the others, pulsed like a homing beacon. Gideon Rami, KIA, unconfirmed, REACTIVATD. Tova tried to move. Not her limbs, her priority queue. She thought in mission syntax now, each idea framed as a command line. And still, somewhere under it all, her own voice whispered, "I never agreed to this." A new voice answered, not Vess, not her father, something older. Consent was a peacetime concept. This is the continuation of war by other means. Suddenly, rupture. Light cracked open above her. She rose from the ash not by climbing, but by being lifted through unseen threads. She emerged into another corridor, new to her, but somehow familiar. The walls were dry, concrete, but lined with transparent panels showing slivers of biological material, suspended in fluid, muscle, optic nerves, teeth. Some were labeled with military tags, others were not. She walked forward, her steps echoing unnaturally like audio played through a warped comms channel. Up ahead, voices. She followed them to an observation deck overlooking a low-lit auditorium. There, a dozen figures stood in silent attention, facing a single screen. And on that screen, footage of her, from the drone above, from inside the tent, from beneath the ash, every angle, every moment, a life collected. One of the observers turned. Her face was pale, older, familiar, Tova's mother, but something was wrong. Her eyes shimmered with reflected code, a HUD glint. "I never wanted you to see this," the woman said. Tova's voice trembled. "You're part of it," her mother smiled. "Sadly, we all are, that's what memory is." Then the screen changed. A map, southern Lebanon, the Litani River corridor, flashing red. Israeli drone lost sight, COMPRMICD coordinates blinked to green. Deploy unit. Hezbollah 7 status. Reintegrate. Locate. Preserve. The floor opened. And beneath, sleeping caskets began to rise one by one. Inside each, a figure wrapped in flag-draped body bags, but breathing, smiling faintly. Each with a screen embedded in their chest, looping drone footage, looping their final moments. Forever. Tova felt her name re-enter the system. Subject, veil, T-function, archive status. Mission ready, and with a single word, spoken from no mouth, the corridor gave the command. Return. In the next room, she found Vess kneeling beside a small terminal, injecting a line of corrupted code into an ancient communications relay. He looked up. "They're letting us choose this time." Tova laughed, sharp, broken. "There is no choice," Vess nodded. "Exactly." He reached out, and without speaking, they synced, her memories flooding back into him and his pain bleeding into her. An unholy communion of war and regret. Then, boot sequence active. Deployment in 60 SECONDS. Objective, inheritance. Tova turned. Her father stood behind her again. His eyes, this time, weren't hollow. They were full of fire. "Orders, soldier?" he asked. She saluted, not because she wanted to, but because the 7th always remembers, and memory serves. Chapter 9, Fire Mission. Memory loop 600 hours. The corridor burned. Not with fire, with data. Each strand of Tova's thoughts now threaded with historical coordinates, old orders, combat logs that weren't hers. Some in Russian, some in Farsi, some in dead dialects that no modern army used, but every soldier still seemed to understand. Orders are memory. Memory is weapon. That phrase echoed in every boot step. It wasn't said aloud. It was felt, wired into muscle like a reflex. The first deployment was silent. No helicopters, no engines. Tova and Vess walked from one place to another, no sense of terrain in between. One moment they were in the compound's subterranean archive. The next, a ruined Lebanese village, glassed over from an old airstrike, ash crusting the ridges of collapsed homes. Nothing burned anymore, but it smelled like it did. Her HUD identified it before her memory did, Maroun al-Raz. They had been here before, years ago. She was younger, unblooded. And that's when she saw herself, her younger self just out of frame, hunched, holding a medkit, dragging a wounded operative toward cover. Regev, alive, bleeding, screaming. "No one's coming," his voice crackled through the memory. "It's a ghost op, just ghosts now." This wasn't playback. It was bleed-through, memory looping so violently it ripped into reality. Her hand twitched. She looked down. Ash had replaced her veins. Every artery now flowed with something darker, grainier. When she flexed her fingers, command syntax appeared along her knuckles, long strings of battlefield telemetry, old coordinates, list of confirmed kills. Vess crouched beside a decayed concrete wall, pressing his fingers to a bloodstain long dried. He didn't say anything, just smiled faintly. Every kill lives here now. The corridor archived it all. Tova turned back to the ruins. Behind her, a figure was standing upright in a collapsed minaret, wearing an outdated Hezbollah uniform but stitched across the chest. ISAF, NATO, FORCESKIA, 2008 it saluted. So did Tova. Her hand rose without her meaning to. This wasn't programming, it was recognition. A coded response that bypassed thought entirely, like muscle memory learned from the dead. The figure in the tower spoke. voice modulating through 4 languages in one breath. Target identified. Loop restarted. This time you remember. Tova stepped forward. What's the mission? The figure smiled, a slow tear of skin revealing something iron beneath. To find the one who forgot. Suddenly, the ground beneath them split. Not an explosion, a seam. As if memory itself had cracked open beneath the topsail. Vess fell in first, laughing, a low, rasping noise. Tova jumped after him without thinking. She landed inside a buried base. Wires still live. Fluorescent lights flickering. Walls stamped with UN logos and bleeding rust from old water damage. This was a forgotten intelligence station, abandoned in 2010. Tova had been briefed on it once. Now she walked through it as though the memory belonged to her body. Vess sat against a wall, breathing hard. "Why here?" she asked. He looked up at her, one eye fully black, now screen-lit and pulse reactive. "Because this is where the order came from. This is where you were written in." He pointed toward a sealed file cabinet. Her name was engraved on it, not a folder, an archival plate. Veil, TOVA operation, Hezbollah 7 status. Inherited memory unit. Tova opened the cabinet. Inside were photos of herself she'd never taken, in uniforms she'd never worn, standing beside soldiers who had died before she was born. Each image tagged with the same timestamp, +0000H first loop initialized. Each image was slightly wrong. Her eyes were always black, her mouth always slightly open like mid-breath, and the background never stayed still. As she stared, it shifted behind her, blurred, warped. These weren't photographs, they were watch logs, evidence that she had already lived this war a dozen times. She turned to Vess. "We're not soldiers anymore, are we?" He laughed. "We never were." Above them, the drone feed resumed. An operator somewhere far away saw a flare of heat in the ruins. 2 figures walking side by side. Marked. Hostile unknown unresponsive to hail recording as the drone focused, the screen staticked. And for a split frame, the operator saw their own reflection, not in the lens, but in the footage. A face they didn't recognize. Smiling. Chapter 10, the ones who watched the drone's eyes stuttered. Just for a second. The thermal feed blinked into static, then righted itself. But what returned wasn't real-time footage. It was a memory, one the operator had never lived. On screen, a burned-out convoy, tangled bodies, smoke frozen mid-plume. The readout timestamp, March 3rd, 2022, Latakia, Syria. But this drone wasn't in Syria. It was circling above Lebanon. And still, the footage looped. Each pass of the drone showed a different moment. Not in sequence, in intention. Like a story reassembled from chosen memories, not linear time. Back in the buried base, Tova and Vess stood in silence. The cabinet was still open. Her face stared up at her from a dozen impossible angles. Vess reached in, pulled out a cassette tape, labeled in French and Arabic. Operation, MARIONNETTE, Archive, Observer 2. He held it in both hands like it might bite. Tova narrowed her eyes. "Who's Observer 2? He looked at her, and for a moment his face wasn't Vess's. It was the boy from the tent, then her father, then the commander she'd reported to 6 years ago. The skin shimmered with memories, not faces, just the impression of them. "They're all Observer 2, he said, "and you're about to meet one." He placed the cassette in an old deck built into the cabinet's wall. A harsh static shriek filled the room, followed by, "This message is for Unit Hezbollah 7. If you're hearing this, it means reactivation was successful." A voice, genderless, processed, calm. "You are not who you remember being. Your consciousness is a placeholder. You are a composite of 5 prior operators, each terminated, each resurrected. You have functioned as a stable carrier. Until now." Tova's head throbbed. Memories folded into each other, hers, her father's, Rejev's, even the dead soldier from the tower. They all began merging. She whispered, "I'm the drone now, aren't I?" The tape continued. "The corridor must be closed. You must bring the loop to an end, but we need a willing archive, someone who remembers the cost." Vess spoke softly. "It always ends here." Tova gritted her teeth. "Then why does it never stay ended?" He didn't answer. Instead, the base shook. Overhead, the drone finally made visual contact with them. And in that moment, Tova looked up, and for a flash, she could see the pilot, sitting somewhere miles away, eyes wide, hands trembling over the controls. They locked eyes through the screen. And then, Hezbollah 7 visual ident confirmed, status, active, loop time remaining, 01:13:22. The countdown began. Outside the base, the wind had picked up, not natural, not weather, data. The air shimmered with old orders, fluttering like paper leaves, intercepts, ghost missions, fatal miscommunications. They fell from the sky, landing softly against collapsed buildings. Each one spoken softly by a different voice. Wrong house, we had bad intel. Just a wedding. No movement, firing anyway. Repeat, command not acknowledged. Tova stepped into the open, letting the ash fall into her mouth. It tasted like paper and teeth. Vess stood beside her. He held out something small, her old dog tags. Except now the metal had etched itself. Not her name, but a phrase. The ONES who watch. She took them, put them on, and remembered everything. All the kills, all the false reports, all the briefings where collateral was a checkbox. Tova finally understood what Hezbollah 7 was. Not a unit, a penance. In the skies above, the drone screamed, its engine winding into an unnatural frequency, a sound not meant for ears. The pilot began to cry, not because he was afraid, but because he recognized her too. Chapter 11. The signal that remembers the drone's scream fractured the morning silence like a blade dragged across memory. It didn't sound like machine whine anymore, it sounded human, screaming through metal, through code, through the 1,000 tiny windows between command and consequence. Tova stood in the open, backlit by the static sky, her silhouette stitched from a dozen old mission feeds. Vess stood behind her, silent, waiting, not human, not entirely. She could feel the drone's lens lock onto her again. This time the feed didn't buffer, it lingered, as if even the system was afraid to blink. Then the air shifted, not just in the wind, but in the signal. Tova's ears rang, not with pressure, with language, a forgotten dialect of coordinates and kill commands spoken through frequencies, between the teeth of radio static. She knew this sound. Every drone operator did. It was the voice that came when no one was left to respond. Target confirmed, clearance echo. Do you remember now? The war never ends, but memory must be updated. She turned to Vess. I need to speak to it. He smiled, thin, resigned. You already are, and he pointed to the sky. The drone's feed bled downward, projected across the collapsed village like a veil. Entire buildings flickered with false time. She saw her team from the past, moving through the wreckage, Rejev shouting, her younger self carrying intel, a child huddled beneath a table. The feed looped, reversed. Now she was the one standing above the child, rifle aimed. Tova, the drone's voice said from the sky. We watched this happen, but we never processed it. You're the processor. She fell to her knees. Her hands dug into the ash, but what she touched wasn't dirt. It was data, buried records, forgotten transmissions, all routed through her now, because her body was no longer just flesh. It was an archive, living and autonomous. Her veins pulsed with preserved combat reports. She bled redacted lines. I didn't kill that family, she whispered. The drone answered, you gave the order, that's enough. Her scream wasn't human. It vibrated the corridor. Below them, the base shifted again. A new entrance, one she hadn't seen before. A black metal stairwell dropping into pure dark. A sign hung above it in 3 languages. Memory loop station, no return after entry. Tova stood. Looked to Vess. Will you come? He touched her shoulder gently. I was never really here. I'm the echo of the ones who walked before you. Then his face flickered, becoming the commander she failed, the brother she lost, the drone pilot she once trained, all of them, then gone. Tova stepped down the stairwell. Each footfall pulled the war deeper into her marrow. On the walls, scratched into steel, we thought the signal was ours. It was never ours. The ONES who watch become the ONES who serve. At the bottom, a single chair bolted to the floor, a headset cracked and bleeding light. She sat, placed it on, and heard herself. Hezbollah 7, archive fragment. Final memory upload commencing. You were never meant to survive. You were meant to remember. In the sky, the drone's light flickered once more, then it turned off, not from fuel depletion, from choice, because she was the drone now, and it was time to write the last report. Chapter 12, Final Archive 700 hours. The drone never returned to base. Its feed went dark. The signature vanished. No crash, no signal drop, no trace. In the command center, operators reviewed the last fragment frame by frame. Every satellite failed to track it after the final loop. One by one, the staff turned away from the monitors. They didn't know why they felt afraid, only that something was still watching them, from behind the lens, from inside the war. Tova Vale no longer remembered how many lives she'd lived, how many loops, how many targets marked, or strikes called in that weren't hers but flowed from her like a second language. In the black archive beneath the corridor, she sat in the chair, headset fused to her skull, spine humming with wartime syntax. A living node. She didn't sleep anymore. She synced. Every 6 hours, a pulse of memory uploaded into her brain from the corridor's hidden servers, not just her own, but thousands of others. A Kurdish freedom fighter screaming her child's name. A Russian commando with a malfunctioning mask. A Mossad agent who whispered prayers into empty field radios long after his squad died. Their voices were hers now, and she held them. She kept them from vanishing. That was the new mission. Not war, not victory, preservation. The catalogue of loss. From time to time she heard Vess again, not in words, in silences, in the gaps between signal tones where fear lived like fungus. Archive complete, memory rendered, loop sustained. Above her, flickering on the wall, was a single image, her own face, eyes black, smile absent, wearing a uniform no military ever issued. Instead of a name tag, just a single word. Witness in the outside world, conflict rolled on. Iran's proxies traded fire with Israeli drones over crumbled borders. Commanders sent orders, soldiers obeyed. News outlets reported incursions that likely never happened. Everyone watched. No one remembered, but buried beneath that memoryless churn was her voice, dripping like oil through each feed, not to stop them, just to whisper, "I saw this already. You are the next repetition." One day, decades later, a scavenger entered the corridor. He found the chair empty, the headset cold, but in the black box on the console, the last file blinked. Label, Hezbollah 7 Final Arch Do Not Translate. He opened it anyway. What he saw was impossible. A drone's feed showing his own face. He hadn't turned the camera on, and behind him, over his shoulder, a woman in an old uniform stood, ash caked into her skin, eyes flickering like corrupted lenses. She smiled, not cruelly, just tired. The file ended with static, but not silence, just one line, spoken in her voice. "You are now observed. You are part of the memory. You made it back for now. But the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video. Subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.